Hi, everyone. This is Craig Zelzer back with another episode of the PCDN Social Change Career Podcast. It's episode 3 in season 13. Woohoo, getting close to Halloween, so it's a fitting season number. Today, we're going to be talking about breaking barriers in leadership and social impact careers with Rachel Fry. I'll go over her experience in a little bit. For people who have not joined us previously, the episode usually goes about an hour. We really enjoy hearing from the community, particularly on LinkedIn, but you can do this on YouTube. So if you're watching now, please put a couple of bullet points or sentence about your background, where you're based, and throughout the episode, please share your questions and comments. This is one of over 150 episodes of the Social Change Career Podcast that features brilliant innovators, leaders, grassroots activists, foundation heads, impact investors from all parts of the world, I think from 20 countries. So 3 quick requests apart from hopefully engaging now. The podcast episode will be live tomorrow. So please, if you like this episode or check out all the others on PCDN Global or any major podcasting platform, please take 30 seconds to rate and or share it. That's the number one thing you can do to help any. If you listen to podcasts, I'm addicted to them. Like just take 30 seconds, share and rate it. Second is consider subscribing to the PCDN newsletter. And third is follow Rachel on LinkedIn and other channels that she shares with you. So Rachel has worked, we actually met in Medellin, Colombia a few months ago, but she has worked across 5 countries and collaborated with thousands of individuals from diverse cultural backgrounds. She started as a Division I soccer player. Our 13-year-old is a very competitive soccer player, and then transitioned into coaching and teaching and then leadership development. She also trained and competed in the sport of freediving, which took her to different places around the world. And I do have another friend who does this, but she'll explain what kind of crazy sport that is. She currently coaches leaders, founders, athletes, and students, helping them develop key skills like motivation, confidence, leadership. She's based in Washington, D.C., and splits her time between D.C. and South America. She serves as the vice president of an environmental nonprofit and holds a master's degree in applied positive psychology, which just makes me happy saying that, and which is the science of human flourishing. So Rachel, thank you so much for making time to join us and share your wisdom and questions and expertise. And for, again, just one other reminder, if you're watching now, particularly on LinkedIn, just let us know your questions, comments, and a couple of bullet points about where you are based. So Rachel, how's your day going? It looks like I'm based in Medellin, Colombia. You're based in DC. Yes. Looks like we both have beautiful weather. Yes. So can you talk what in the world is positive psych? I mean, I think I know what it is, but for people who don't know, what is positive psychology, and does that mean you have to be happy all the time, or what is the difference between positive psychology and behavioral psychology or social psychology? What is it?
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me. And like Craig said, we connected when I was down in Medellin, Colombia, but I'm based here in DC. The weather is a little bit chillier, but still sunny out. But really happy to be on the podcast today and talk with you, Craig. And as far as positive psychology, that's a great question because a lot of people don't know or aren't familiar with this science. This is what I studied in my master's, and it is not just something where everything needs to be positive. You need to be happy all the time. Like I think you said in the intro, it's the study of human flourishing, and a lot of what the psychology background and history of psychology. I can go a little bit back into that just when we were dealing with things specifically, and I'll explain it through the lens of the US. When soldiers were coming back from Vietnam War, we had a lot of study, like there was a lot of pressure to switch the study of psychology to what we now call PTSD. At the time, people were trying to figure out what was going on with people when they were coming back, the depression, anxiety, all the issues. So a lot of the funding started going within the psychology field, going into what's wrong with people, how to fix what's wrong with people, right? And now I think we've seen a trend in the last 20 years of therapy being a lot more normalized, people seeking out mental health support, which is great. And those are all things that I advocate for and am big on saying, go get talk therapy if you need it for help. But what we started to switch away from in the psychology fields was looking at what's right with people. So there's a lot of things that people do well already. And it's not just about what's wrong with you. How do we fix this? How do we fix your trauma? Maybe, looking at all your weaknesses, looking at the things that you're not doing well. And so positive psychology, Martin Seligman was the founder and sort of the spearheaded this science. It's an applied science to kind of come back into the whole field of psychology. And what this does is now brings back to light, okay, how can we study what people do well? So the study of human flourishing and the study of how people can optimize off of their performance. And so a lot of positive psychology is looking at what people do well naturally. So talking about strengths, talking about incorporating skills and techniques that you can use, and then you're optimizing off of that. So I like to say when you're going to therapy and looking at things that you're maybe there's the anxiety or things getting in the way of your normal functioning day to day, right? And so you want to go to therapy to help bring you back to normal functioning. But positive psychology, a lot of what that does is people who are already at normal functioning, and they want to really excel maybe in their career, or they have some goals and they really want to optimize off of who they are and reach their potential. And that's what this can do. This can help you go from normal functioning to optimal.
Wonderful. I mean, I come from a family of lots of mental health professionals and have done therapy, all different kinds. Something I highly recommend if people have the time and or resources, even if you don't have. I mean, everyone has challenges, but just one other question on this, and then we'll get more to career stuff. But do you find when you go to a social gathering or you're around people, is everyone approaching you like with their either leadership challenges or their emotional questions, since they're like, because if you think positive psychologist, I have relatives who've been psychiatrists and, other therapists, but there's something about positive psychology I think would just bring out a different type of interaction if you introduce yourself that way.
Yeah. And I think because of my training and because of what I've done, people tend to and not always, but I think people tend to feel safe, when they're sharing things. I've noticed sometimes people sharing stuff with me that they didn't expect to, even with friends or people that I've met, like traveling, being down in different countries. And I think people are curious, and I think people want to feel good. So I think the nice thing about positive psychology is the focus is really on what you already do well and what your natural strengths are, what your gifts are, rather than me coming in analyzing what's wrong with you. And I tend to do that naturally anyway, looking at people's potential. And so I think that's why this was a good fit for me with my studies and then now with my work. But I think people are curious, like you asked, what is it? What is it, just being happy all the time? And then taking it a step further, people wanting to know, what are some things, I will get questions. What are some things that I could do? Or what do you think? Or, I'm in a leadership role. I want to seek a leadership position. What are some, tips that you offer? And so, it depends on, obviously in DC, there are a lot more networking and professional interactions in that way. And those questions will come up.
I mean, in the field of peace building, Johan Galtung came up with the terms negative, positive, structural conflict and peace. And obviously a lot of what peace building has been about is studying what causes conflict and how to mitigate or transform it. But there is a whole field of positive peace. This is similar to positive psychology, is that actually we can learn a lot more from societies or communities or companies or organizations that are, no one's perfect, but they're getting it reasonably right. So instead of just saying why is there so much violence and conflict in many places in the world, in many cities, what about the opposite? Why are there places that maybe have conditions that could result in large scale conflict, whether it's verbal or violent or structural, but actually it doesn't happen? And I got the pleasure years ago meeting Elise Boulding, who's one of the pioneers. So there's a lot of work in peace psychology and peace kind of positive peace, but it's a different topic. So thinking about, I think, did you grow up in Missouri or you went to university in Missouri?
I grew up in Maryland.
Okay, Maryland. Okay.
Yeah, so outside of DC. Okay. Yeah.
So if you think back to your teenage years, little bit, have you always been an athlete? And then when, did you have any particular visions of what you might do as a, let's say, young adult or professional adult? And how did you go from how would you summarize your career track to what you're doing today?
Yeah. So when I was a teenager, I was not thinking about what my career would be because I was already in a career. And so I think a lot of people who grow up, and I know your son is kind of in the depths of it now with soccer. Um, I grew up playing sports very competitively and from a young age in multiple sports. And then it turned into just soccer and basketball, but it was year round, playing in travel teams. I did Olympic development teams. It was very intense and very high level and required a lot of time training. And to me, this was just the norm. That was all I knew, and all my friends were doing it. So it wasn't until college that I realized, no, this isn't how everyone grows up. But I think for me, I was so in it. I was so focused. It was all about, how to get better, how to train, being with my team, how to work with my teammates, my coaches, what's the next thing. So it was very year to year. And then obviously when you're in high school, if you want to play in college, you're thinking of, that's kind of the main goal too. What do you have to do to, get to the next level? If you want to play in school, and so that becomes kind of the focus too, more when you're later in high school, junior, senior year. I think it's probably even starting earlier nowadays, but really my focus was sports. And then when I played D1 soccer, it was full on just trying to juggle school and soccer at the time. So for me, I felt like I had been in a career up until I graduated college. But when I went into college, I didn't really know what I wanted to study. And I ended up taking an environmental science class. It was an environmental sociology, kind of a mix of the two classes. And I really liked it. I've always been someone who loves outdoors and very active. And so that kind of clicked for me. And I ended up deciding to major in that as well. So and as far as like how that segued into my career, I was always coaching in high school, coaching soccer. I ended up having my own small business at the time. I was training young kids in mainly like skill development. So one-on-one, I would work with them for an hour at a time, at least once or twice a week. And I was doing that in the summers when I would come home. And then after school, I took on a couple of different coaching jobs with a team. I was working with a training company and then training on my own. And so that I didn't really think that, oh, I'm going to go into coaching. I just sort of was doing it because of soccer, because it's what I knew. And I was taking that skill and using it to make money at the time. And I ended up taking a job after college, a year after college in Thailand, and did a teaching job over there. And really the teaching job was a way to, see how I like teaching, but also means to go live in another country. I think at that point, it was a lot harder to do the remote living thing like that right now. That's a lot more common and easier. But at the time, you really had to find a job where you were going. And so a lot of these jobs I ended up doing just because they were kind of a means to an end, but also a way to gain experience. So I wanted to go and live in another culture. So I got a teaching job. And it wasn't until I had a few of those that I realized, oh, this is actually what I want to do. I'm not just doing these jobs just because it's actually something I'm good at. I'm really interested in getting better at it. I want to learn my craft. I want to go back to school and study more. And so I do feel like I fell into it a little bit. But it was also trying other things and noticing, oh, I actually like this more, when I would try something else and realize it didn't naturally come to me.
Yeah. To interrupt there, obviously, I think I'm older than you. I'm not going to ask your age, but for people, whatever country they're from, let's say if they have a university degree,
Mm-hmm.
there's always to learn, and they're thinking about trying to find a educational job outside their home country. Any tips for how you did it, and particularly like the first time, because once you do it once, it becomes easier to understand the process. But how did you, any tips for how do you land whether it's teaching English or sports or science or math?
Yeah.
How do people go about finding those jobs? And any tips if someone comes to you, like what is exciting about that? And what are some of the challenges about landing a teaching role outside your home country?
Yeah. So for me, I think the first thing is I talked to people that had done it before. So I contacted people in my network. I know there were a couple of people that went to my undergrad that had done something similar. So I reached out to them, talked with them, because it wasn't something that my school promoted. Oh, you should go and teach abroad when you're done with school. So having conversations and then getting an idea of, oh, is this the kind of country I'd want to be in? I know coming from every country, it's going to be different with obviously with the visas and barriers. You know, if you're coming from certain countries, I know that visas and getting into other places can be a barrier. And that's not something I'm well versed on, but I would say you can Google online. TEFL is an organization that has a lot on TEFL, the acronym, and there's different ways you can teach abroad in different countries. I think every country has sort of a hub. And for me, I went over and did an actual teaching course, and that helped a lot. I didn't have a job set up before I left, but they did say, you can do this month-long teaching course and we'll help you. And so that did feel like a safety net for me in case I couldn't find something on my own. But at the time they provided websites and places where you can post your resume online. But I think going over, getting there, taking a course, starting to network, getting connections really helped a lot. But having conversations with people, doing research online, I would say when just being down in Medellin the last or 6 months out of this past year, I think what I'm noticing too, because I'm personally working toward language fluency with Spanish. And so I'm going to different language exchanges, meeting Colombians. And a lot of what I see for them as a ticket to go and work away is to learn English. And so if you have the opportunity, and some of them are getting their work to sponsor that, taking classes, they're doing stuff on their own, they're going to these free language exchanges. There's lots of free resources too, but I do think that having that language skill can help a lot and open doors.
Wonderful. And I put in some research again. If you're a U.S. citizen, Peace Corps, it's not always for teaching. It can be economic development, gender health, voluntary service overseas. What Rachel talked about, get TEFL certification or whatever equivalent, whether you're a French native speaker, Spanish. Teach for All, which is the global network that started first Teach for America. There's a lot going on around education and innovation, not just around, at all levels. So, and there's a lot of jobs in both online and also in schools and in universities. But of course, there's always visa and other challenges, but it can be a really interesting way. Fulbright, you can go as a junior Fulbrighter and teach in other schools. So there's a lot of opportunities depending on your location and skill set. So how would you describe if someone came to you and said, what is your job? Like, what do you do today? I mean, first is how would you describe it? And then what is your work life like on a day-to-day or weekly basis? But if we were meeting for the first time, in DC, this is very popular. In Colombia, it's not. In Colombia, people don't talk as much about work. DC is the first thing, hi, what's your name and what do you do? In Colombia, it's you can know somebody for you probably know something about their job, but you can know them for months. You don't really know what they do. So how would you describe?
Definitely cultural.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely a cultural thing here. See, I've been back the last week or so, and so I'm definitely having to shift my mindset back to that questioning. But for me, just knowing my background with being an athlete and then coaching in sports, teaching, a lot of that informs how I help people now. And then having my behavioral science master's, so I use the title high performance and leadership specialist. And what I do now is partner with different environmental and social impact companies. And I'll work with them, with their leaders one-on-one, doing counseling and also doing team trainings. I work with athletic teams, so working one-on-one with their team. So a lot of it is coming in, and then we're also working with founders. So founders, specifically in incubator, accelerator programs that are building impact-focused businesses. One of which is, you heard of it, Halcyon House in Washington, D.C. here. They're great incubator program for impact-focused businesses and specifically for international founders. So a lot of international founders come through that program. And what I like to say I do is help people with their performance. So helping people gain skills that can help aid them in their professional goals. So whether that's building confidence, motivation, building resiliency, especially for founders, going through the entrepreneurial path can be very challenging and creating a lot of things like burnout. So for me, I really like partnering. Really like going in and helping people that are trying to create change in the world, doing I doing impact focused work. So partnering with companies that have people that are really passionate, are motivated, and want to do good in the world, and helping them gain tools, looking at what they can do to improve their performance, and also do it in a way that feels good, so um, they're not burning out all the time. I think people in this, specifically in the impact field, I don't know if you're going to get into that in a question in a minute, but um, they tend to feel pretty burned out because they're driven by passion, they're driven by this motivation, but they're not always taking care of themselves in a way that makes their like work life balance great. And we've seen this living in Colombia for years now. It's very different in the US. I think it's different across different cultures. And so for me, knowing that, having lived in different places, I'm able to kind of take a step back and say, oh, this is, the culture here. It's DC is very work focused. People are going to work events after work, sometimes working on the weekends. And so there's not always a lot of stepping away from your work. And there's also a lot of passion. People are very educated here, very passion driven. And so that's a fun energy to be around as well.
And yeah, just Halcyon House does amazing projects and incubators. Some are only open to US or DC based founders, but others are open to global. So if you've got an early stage impact focused startup that is working on social challenges, I think they're still doing it twice a year, where they bring in fellows, they give you housing, some money for living, incredible programming, and then access to this great network. But for people who don't know Halcyon, anything else you want to say why they might want to check it out?
Yeah, I mean, I have friends down in Medellin that have done their program. I have friends pretty much all over. They have programs that are focused on health, climate, and then they have them specifically focused in different regions of the world. So they might have a Caribbean, Latin American one, Middle East. And so just keep an eye, like go to their website if you are somebody that's thinking of building a startup or have started something and needing support to take to the next level. I think that's a great program great resource as well. And I'm sure you'll add that to the list.
Yes. Yeah. And then again, just for anyone watching, I see a few people on YouTube or LinkedIn. Feel free to put in your comments or questions. We'd love to hear from you. You saw my 13 son back there. He's off to school today, so he's trying to. He likes Jacob. I'm doing a podcast. He likes to do things real. So a question here, and you already started talking about this. I personally have burnt out, I'd say 3 to 4 times majorly in my life. And sometimes it's my own responsibility, working too much, and sometimes it's the system, sometimes it's a combination of things, and sometimes it's financial insecurity, like we're applying for funding or grants. First, and part of it is that challenge. If you do it, all jobs can have meaning, and I wish every job in the world had something connected to making things better. Like we don't need more widgets, like the planet's on fire. But what do you see as the common sources? What tends to cause burnout? Is it individual, or is it structural? And then when the world is in such deep crisis, and particularly many people are working in their own communities or countries or cities that are really having challenges. So it's hard to, it's not just like, you close your computer or notebook for the day and you're done. Like these are sometimes life and death, or other times just maybe not life and death, but they really have a big impact. So what are your thoughts about what causes the burnout? And then what have you found helps the most, both at the individual, organizational, and systems level?
Right. Yeah. And it's definitely a mix of both. So not to put the blame on everyone individually for them to feel shame and blame, that it's all on them. It's obviously a systemic issue as well, and dependent on where you are in the world. I think here in New York, certain cities and areas in the US, people are more prone to burnout because there's such a a heavy focus on work. What do you do? People are really trying to climb the ladder, trying to we live in a capitalist society, so people are trying to make more money. People are trying to get ahead in their career, take the next step. And you really see that sense of urgency and that drive when you're going to different events or just meeting people around in the city. And so I think that for people, and then it's taking it to the next level, people in the impact fields of social environmental impact, people are more prone to that burnout because they have this passion, they have this drive, and they're not really switching it off. This feeling that I need to keep working because I'm doing good in the world, and almost not allowing themselves to have breaks. We're humans. And the example I like to use too, because when I was playing, years of playing sports, but then also when you play at the D1 level, professional level, it definitely switches. It goes from a totally different playing field of, oh, I'm playing, I'm really trying to work hard, to, no, this is a job. And especially when I can speak for myself, for playing at in college, it was a job. And so I had to worry about things like injury. I had to make sure that my performance was up, because if you're on scholarship, you need to maintain high performance. And Serena Williams is a great example because she talks about this. She prioritizes rest a lot. And she's somebody that's at the peak of her sport, her level. And for her, she makes sure that she's resting, that she's sleeping, she's taking days off. So if you're an athlete and you're playing 7 days a week and you're not giving your body a day off, you're going to be more prone to injuries. Performance is going to drop because your muscles and your body haven't had time to recover. And so you're going to see that in performance. And then obviously with injuries, you'll then the risk will be you'll be out for potentially 6 months, trying to then recuperate your body. And so I like to use the example because people in the impact field, especially founders, I know you've probably seen this too, Greg, with founders, is they don't really think that taking time off means I'm getting behind. So when you're in a field where I'm really passionate, motivated, and then also in this sense of urgency, I want to excel, I'm driven, I want to get ahead. People are burning out because they're not prioritizing things like rest, sleep, eating well. And it's not just rest like sitting on a couch, it's mental rest too, taking time away from thinking about your work. So having boundaries with your work. I know other countries are getting better about this, where you can't email your employees after a certain hour. I don't know the specific countries right now. But having taking time for hobbies, taking time to connect with friends, and doing things that shifts you out of that stress response, that stress mode, or constantly thinking, analyzing. And that actually can help your work, which people don't realize. That actually brings energy back, brings creativity, performance will go up, motivation will come back. And so that's the trend I see the most.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, like I've been a co-founder a couple of times of small NGOs or media, and have been at the where I've gotten so stressed I couldn't sleep sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, different roles, and sometimes it's about are we going to pay the bills, or where's the next check coming from? Or other times it's a big project and oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? Or other times it's not about me, but it's a funder I have funding from, and the funder is not happy. Yeah. And it doesn't affect me, but it affects other, so I've lost sleep and gotten so stressed sometimes. So I think it's a real challenge. And so 2 questions here. I'll just start with the first one. So in the social impact sector, obviously, if you're a founder of an NGO or a startup, you can help create the cultural conditions to some degree, not always, but there is that tension, either money's coming in, more money's coming in than going out. And if that's not the case, I've been on multiple boards, and sometimes it's I won't say which organization, but there's one organization, decent sized budget, but then it would get to July and the CEO is like, do we have money to pay the bills? It's that's a structure, and everyone's trying to do their part, but that is a different level of stress than just getting all the work done. But one question, what have you, if you come into an organization, whatever type, foundation, nonprofit, community-based organization, and you're trying to accompany them to think about, it's not like, of course you can equip individuals, but the system, and I'm not talking about like the large system, but an organizational
Mm-hmm.
system, what do you see as the things that an organization can best do to create conditions where, of course, everyone's going to have stress, but where it's not going to be debilitating? And, for example, we do angel
Mm-hmm.
investing in impact startups, and I've, a couple of startups we've been involved in have, I've seen the stress. Like for me as an small investor, not a big investor,
Mm-hmm.
like there's a stress we're going to lose that investment. But the founders, like they've got 10, 20 people on their team, and so that. But like, what can organizations do? And I think a good example is
Mm-hmm.
776. Serena Williams' husband, Alexis Ohanian, both the
Yeah.
foundation and the venture fund. I think they devote 1% of all investment that founders can use for coaching and well-being. But like, like if you come into an organization and they're like, we think we're having some challenges, and obviously, what would you suggest
Mm-hmm.
that leaders or employees think about to build a better organization in this crazy system?
Yeah. So I'll answer that in two different ways, because there's definitely a structural way and then things that people can just incorporate in smaller bite-sized manners. But with the structural, a lot of our businesses are not just human-centered design. And so when you design a company around the health and well-being and flourishing of your employees, that actually has a better effect on the performance, on business, on the economics. But we have all these traditional models, which is we need to extract as much as we can from our employees so that we are able to make as much money as we can. And the model should be, how can we best support our employees? How can we if you were to, completely overhaul the thought process of a company and say, is this human centered? If it's not, where can we make changes? And that can help, just having that perspective shift too. So you're not just putting band-aids on things like, oh, we have a 1% for our well-being package for employees, but then you have very demanding managers, the leadership is not organized, and that's still not going to help the employees thrive. So I would say, if you're in a position in a leadership role or in a position to kind of start making that change, think about, is my company, is my organization, business human centered? And if not, where can I start to make those changes? And then on a smaller level, I would say, people, if you're in a leadership role and I've seen this with founders too. They say, oh, my employees aren't passionate. They're not doing the job. They're not, and your employee is not always going to share, especially if you're a founder, the same passion and drive, because you're the one that started that startup. And, but they're there. And, the one of the biggest ways people can be motivated is by positive feedback. So I'm a big believer in positive feedback to motivate people, and then also constructive feedback, but not critical feedback. Critical feedback to me doesn't motivate people, can often deflate people, make them feel worse, make them feel not as motivated. And so, thinking as a manager, if you have an employee that's not performing, that's not motivated, talk with them, try to understand what their motivations are. If it's money just to support their family and that's why they're there, that's okay. And that, having that understanding, but showing that you appreciate them. People say employee retention is really reliant on feeling appreciated. So people will stay in jobs that pay a little bit less. They'll take a pay cut if they know that they're appreciated and valued and respected by their boss, their superior in their job. So making it known you appreciate your staff, and then, complimentary, noticing when they do things. And if you want to offer something constructive, making sure that you're doing it by providing more positive feedback, and then the constructive feedback, and then again positive feedback. And that's going to actually motivate people. They're going to be more emotionally invested in the company. And that can help too. If people go home and I had a good day at work because my boss complimented me, or they said I did a good job, or they gave me. And the other thing would be autonomy. So people feeling like they have ownership over what they're doing at work. And those things can help with burnout, because if you're going home from work and you have this overbearing boss who's micromanaging or never noticing when you do things well, that carries over when you go home, you don't feel great. And so those are just, I would say, like more band-aid things that you could use if you're in a position to do so.
So a related question: if someone was considering hiring you as an individual coach or organizational, and they
Mm-hmm.
said, "What are the metrics that you use or you and your clients use to show impact or change or anything related?" It might not just be specific to you. Think about leadership coaching in general. Because
Mm-hmm.
obviously, like, I could say I worked with you and I feel better, or I'm
Yeah.
sleep. Like, what are the indicators? I mean, let's not make it specific to you, but in general, around coaching and individual and organizational change, like, what are indicators to show that the input of energy and time and whatever the intervention or help
Mm.
is? How do others in the coaching field think about measuring change? And like, what are the
Yeah.
things that you think? Like, basically, I was in a call this week where it's like,
Mhm.
this is what we know and this is what we don't know, but we should know. So, like, around leadership coaching, like, what are the things that the field
Mhm.
knows about change and the things you wish the field could do better at?
Yeah, so I think Forbes, the statistic that I know Forbes came up with was, investing in leadership, counseling, coaching, getting support to your leaders to be better leaders has a 700% increase in value in the company. A return on investment was a 700% return on investment. And so a lot of times if I'm coaching people at the director managerial level, but they have they have a pretty toxic leadership staff, that can be challenging because I'm helping them individually, but then there's still structural barriers that they're going to have to face and deal with. So investing in, I would say, a service like this, like someone coming in and has organizational psychology, behavioral science background, can help leaders become better leaders. Hopefully, that's something that they're interested in, and that has that trickle down effect with the staff. You can think about it, with sports, because I know your son plays soccer. If you have a toxic coach, and then all the players are going out and doing their best to work on skills and doing things on their own, they're coming back to the team, and the coach puts them in the game and is just screaming at them the whole time. It's how much can you really do in that scenario? So I think having somebody come in and work with the leadership staff, and what I've done is work with that, and then also work with teams, because it's great to look at what do your staff want, what are their individual goals. Understanding that can help too. So employee retention is definitely an indicator of are people happy, are they emotionally invested in staying in your company, and that would be the goal, because it costs companies a lot of money to replace people. So they lose a lot of money when people quit. Now, in our times now, it's very different than probably when my parents were growing up. You get a job, you stay in that, especially because both my parents worked in the government. It's, stable. We work our way up and then we stay in that grade in the government. And now people have to leave to get promotions. They have to leave to get ahead. And so is a company providing an avenue for you to grow, to excel, because that's going to cost your company a lot less to make small investments. Here's some coaching, here's some professional development resources, go to conferences, go, get counseling, go do this, and keep them in there, rather than having to have every 3 years you're replacing because that takes time, that's money. And I forget the number, but it's a huge loss of money for companies when when their employees are leaving.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, obviously, there's different parts of social impact, whether it's international development or humanitarian relief or foundations. But I
Mm-hmm.
I do remember one of my first, let's say, real jobs about 30 years ago. I had
Yeah.
a mentor, so it's really really important to have like mentors you can check in with. And this
Yeah,
mentor said
definitely.
to me, "They're going to overwork you and underpay you, but like you need to do this." I mean, he wasn't telling me to take it, but he said, "If you get this experience, it'll open doors." So like that, and I
Yeah.
went to the job. I got to manage a grant of like whatever contract of $1 million.
Mhm.
After 14 months, I quit. But it was like, but like having that kind of sense. But what is the? Because there
Yes.
are a lot of organizations, whether they're for profit, nonprofit, who just chew up their employees
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
spit them out. And so, is there
Yeah.
any data on that? Like, is there any? I need to do research on this, but if you think of like a sector or type of
Me
employers.
too.
Is there like a normal rate of turnover, like in a medium-sized nonprofit, it's 10% turnover per year, or like, I mean, and one of the things I think's changed, like Reid Hoffman did a book on this maybe like 10 years ago, The Startup of You. And I think one of the things too is like that a really healthy organization shouldn't, I mean, they should create pathways for their employees, but they shouldn't try to hold on to them. And like, if they need to leave and do something else, great. And sometimes they might come back. So I think they're like that used to be the model. Like, you get a job, you stay maybe 5, 10, 20 years, but now it's like, it's much more fluid for some employers. But any thoughts on that? Like,
Yeah.
And then from the potential candidate side, because I've had this myself and also work with a lot of job candidates, mid-career professionals. Like, what are your suggestions for vetting an organization? Because obviously they tend to have, when you get more senior, you can have more power, but like potential employers tend to have more power over potential employees. But like, if you don't just need a job to pay the bills and you have some savings or some support, like, how do you try to avoid winding up in a place that is toxic or difficult or just not a good match? Because it does happen.
Yeah, and it might not be avoidable altogether, because I think we've all had jobs that didn't turn out, but you do learn a lot from those as well. And so because I studied environmental science in my bachelor's, I worked in that field. That's the industry that I tend to focus on as well. And because I'm on one of the VPs at DC Eco Women, which is a DC based environmental nonprofit. And that is huge still in that industry, is that, when you're right out of school, bachelor's, sometimes even master's, there's this expectation of working for nothing, or basically nothing, not a living wage. And so what you see in that industry is kind of a gap with, a class and wealth gap, people who have access to doing unpaid internships, or low paying job, or they're having to get second jobs, or living at home with their parents, or getting subsidy from their parents. And so that field tends to have this barrier, people of color, people who are coming from different classes, aren't having the same, the avenue to get there is very different. And I've seen this too, because I've worked in the field and I've turned down opportunities because they're unpaid, and they're or they're the pay is too low. And so for me, it was, not something I could do. But I think in that field, it's still pretty prevalent, which is disappointing, because there's a lot of people who are passionate and who want to work in that field, but seems to still be a barrier of entry of get experience. But the way you have to get experience is by volunteering, essentially.
Yeah, so it's a catch-22. Many employers want you to have 1 to 5 years experience, but then whether you do a bachelor's, master's, or other experience, the employers, and I think fellowships are a great way around that. There's lots of ways to get around it, but it's really hard
Definitely.
with large-scale structural issues. And there's been some good progress. Like, I forgot his name, Carlos, who runs Pay Our Interns, or started it. The State Department. It's crazy. A lot of government departments, do offer great paid internships. A lot don't, but there's been better movement around these issues of class and identity, that it shouldn't just be for people who come from families where they have the resources to pay these things, if we want to create a more equitable society. A question, since you've worked, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add too, and this might be a helpful resource, because I don't know if some of your listeners are, going back to school or doing a bachelor's, or even master's. My college, the reason I interned at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and one summer during college, and I was able to do that because I applied for a scholarship to pay for the internship. So, and when so they have a program like that at my school, but then also at University of Shady Grove, when I was doing career counseling, I had a contract with them for a year, and they also have a program like that. And that school really tailors to a lot more international students, and students that are coming from families where they're the first person in their family going to college. And so a lot of people are working and going to school, but they have options where you can look for internships that are listed and vetted with the school, and the school will, you can get a scholarship, or it counts as credit. There's ways around that, so you're not just working for free, and a lot more colleges are doing that. So that's one way of trying to work around that in a systemic way to
Yeah.
so you're getting that experience, but you're not doing it for free.
Yes. I mean, so there are a decent number of paid opportunities. When I was at Georgetown full time, the same thing, we would support students to do applied field
Mm-hmm.
work with partners, and we would fund it pretty generously. Sometimes we
Yeah.
had funding, and other times it was just from core tuition funding because it was that important. But there's also like
Mm-hmm.
look at fellowships, because there's so many fellowships out there that could
Yeah.
provide path. For me, that was one of the great ways to get more experience. A
Mm-hmm.
related question. So what do
Mm-hmm.
you do in your own life? I mean, not to get, I mean, nothing to share too personal, but when you
Yeah.
have burned out, or like, how do you, like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you practice yourself? I mean, is it you go out and run 10 miles, you meditate, you do yoga, but like, what do you find works
Yeah.
best for you around avoiding burnout?
Yeah, I don't run 10 miles, but
Mm.
I would say something that you could do, because I myself have done therapy and then also studying this and being an athlete for years. I've kind of learned what, and it's not to say I don't have bad days. I definitely do. But I have tools now to help when I have them. And so if you're somebody that is prone to burnout or prone to getting stressed, a lot of it is getting that self-awareness first when it's happening, and then the next thing is having like a list of tools, so you could write it down on paper. What are the things I'm going to do when I'm starting to feel this way? One of the easiest things you could do is go for a 20-minute walk. There's a lot happening, especially if you can access a walking area that's has more trees, birds, natural sounds. Putting your phone away for that whole time, so not having your headphones in and engaging your different senses. But then also, what's happening is something with the lateral eye movement, and that can help you shift out of a stress response. So doing a 20-minute walk, and it also can help with creativity. So if you're disengaging from being very focused on something and you let your mind kind of drift, you might have ideas pop in, but really it's really getting you out of that stress response, and that happens with that lateral eye movement when you're walking. Another thing, I do meditate every day. Most days I try to, and I think that can help. It's not, as just a Zen time in the morning. It's really mental training. So if you're somebody that goes to the gym, you can think of meditation or mindfulness techniques as something where you're training your brain. So training your brain to not get hijacked all the time by all your thoughts, and finding that center place. So then when you do have a lot of noise, you're stressed, you're able to come back to that center point when you're in those moments of stress, because you've been training yourself to do that. So if you can think of it as a training exercise in the morning for your brain, that's really
Mhm.
helpful. I'm trying to think. Exercise is great, if you have access to it. And something I would do in Medellin is, because we have the mountain, it's in a mountain range. And for people that aren't familiar with the city, it's a city that kind of sits in this, is it a valley, or
Yeah.
I don't know how you would describe a valley with mountains. And so it's also another thing, if you have access to wide open spaces, going and taking a walk and then sitting at a viewpoint that has a very open space. And that can also have a calming effect on your brain. So whether it's the ocean, mountains, so those are all like things that you can do just to kind of mitigate when those stress responses come up. Obviously, sleep is really important. Like, I was going back to the athlete metaphor. If you're an athlete and you're not getting adequate sleep, I think for athletes, the research said they need at least 9 hours of sleep in addition to a nap during the day.
Mhm.
And so the top athletes are ones that are that's a non-negotiable. It's not like, oh, I'm going to go to bed late and I have a game tomorrow. It's definitely not something. I mean, in college it can be hard because you're juggling school, but for professional athletes, that's something that they have, like, their routine. They protect that time. There's a huge boundary around those things because they know that that's going to directly affect their performance.
Mhm. Yeah, just a couple of things that I'm doing
Yeah.
some EMDR therapy now. It's really interesting,
Oh,
and it's,
great.
so it's interesting. And then I'm addicted to pickleball, and
Okay.
I can't
Nice.
play every day, but I would love to
Half
play
of
three
the
or
US
four.
is right now.
It's growing in Medellin, but it's 3 hours we usually play, and by a certain point, I just hit the zone. Doesn't matter like obviously I can't do it
Uh-huh.
every day, but it's like it's magical. because it's like just
Yeah.
high intensity. I mean, it's not weightlifting, but it's my wife does a lot of CrossFit or something like something that's
Yeah.
intense and just gets you out.
Hmm.
So a
Flow
question.
state.
We met through a mutual friend, Lena Restrepo, who does a lot of
Uh-huh,
work with
Lena.
sport for development. So can you share a little bit about
Mhm.
like what is this field of sport for development and how are you engaged with it?
Well, Lena and I are friends, and I know she was connected with an organization and somebody in the US. So her we definitely have a lot of overlap with our work. She
Mhm.
was a professional soccer player in Medellin, and um, then segued out, went back to school, studied psychology, and she likes to use, for I know with her goals, she's using sport as a way to help people develop. So she calls it like the door, the puerta to
Yeah.
get in, and help people. So sport, it's not about sport necessarily or getting better or becoming a professional athlete, but sport is sort of the example that, or the way she'll use to engage with students. So it's through games, and then incorporating all the stuff that we've been talking about, like
Yeah.
mindfulness or things that can help. That I know with her, she's dealing more on the side of, the psychology side of people with looking at their weaknesses, stresses, anxiety, depression, trauma, and that's more of what she's doing, but using it through the lens and getting in the door with these kids through sport.
Yeah. Yeah. So that for people, we'll have someone on. I've got some friends who work, but there is an entire field of sport for development, which,
Hmm.
part of it is leadership, part of it is collaborative sports, and part of it is, Lena has been to Mexico to work with people who are blind. And I mean, they're already doing
Yeah.
soccer or go to use sports
Hmm.
as a tool for integration. And, it's interesting because Colombia just hosted the under 20 Women's World Cup. So we went to a lot of the games in
Yep.
Medellin. And it is interesting because
Mhm.
it's a paradox because FIFA has all these signs like no to racism and no to this. But then,
Yeah.
soccer or all sports are amazing. But then when they get to a certain level, there's a certain level of bizarreness about it. When it gets to
Hmm.
super competitive elite. Um, so
Yeah.
a couple more questions. A couple more questions
Yeah.
before we end. Like,
Yeah.
what are you currently? Not that you have to be, but are you currently working on
Uh-huh.
upskilling? And then for people who want to work at the intersection of change making and leadership, and whether it's as a
Hmm.
coach or as a CEO or a founder, like what is your advice? For someone who's like they want to work towards a leadership position, like
Hmm.
what is your, I mean, obviously it's specific to the role, but what is your advice? Like these are skills that are probably going to be in demand and helpful. Are there things you
Hmm.
see? Part of it is like the resiliency skills, but part of it's technical skills. So do you see, for people who are, let's say, mid-career going towards a leadership role, like your recommendations for upskilling, like what's in demand or likely to stay in demand?
Yeah. So I just did a strengths based leadership training yesterday for DC Eco Women, and there were a number of women coming that weren't yet in leadership roles, but it was something they're interested in, and so they've got their eye on, okay, I want to move up to the next role, or they're wanting to make a lateral transition within their field, and they're already in leadership roles, and so the focus we did yesterday was how to figure, and this is a big backbone of positive psychology as well, is like looking at what you do well naturally, right? So looking at your strengths, and if you're able to figure that out and get a good idea of what you naturally do well, and I like to define we define strengths in this field as something you enjoy and that you're good at. So it's not just something you're good at, you have to enjoy it too. And you have to get bursts of energy, and it's something that sometimes you don't even notice that it's a strength because it's something that comes so naturally to you. It feels easy almost. And so if you have a really good understanding of what those are, your core strengths, then when you're looking for positions, you can look at how they're describing that role, and are they saying, oh, they're asking me to do this and this, and that doesn't really fall, that I know that I'm actually not going to be engaging my strengths in that. And so I think it can help a lot with like filtering out, so you're not ending up in a leadership position where you're having to be somebody you're not, because that's going to burn you out very quickly. And a lot of leadership can look a lot of different ways. So if you have a good understanding of your strengths, if you're looking for jobs right now, or if you're looking to take the next step up in your career, and you've kind of got your eye on a promotion or director manager level, having that understanding, this base knowledge, is going to give you a leg up. So then when you are entering that role, you're not going to feel this pressure of, I have to be somebody I'm not. I need to be assertive. I need to be all these traditional characteristics that we think leadership are. And, humor is a strength. Humor is a leadership, a strength that you can use in a leadership role to diffuse stressful situations, to diffuse conflict. And there are other things like being flexible, empathy. So these are all characteristics that you can use in a leadership role. And if you have an understanding of that, then when you go into that position, you're going to be able to sort of design your job around that, the core person of who you are, rather than, because if you're showing up to work and you have to pretend to be somebody you're not, that's going to lead to burnout very quickly. And you're not going to be a good leader. You're not going to be performing well. You're going to lose motivation. And so really what we want to see when people are using their strengths, that's when they're going to able to optimize and go to the next level. And so if you're looking to go to the next level in your career, going to leadership role, the best way that positive psychology says to do that is to build and develop your strengths rather than focusing on building and developing your weaknesses.
Mm-hmm. It's like asset mapping in a community, mm-hmm. which I learned a little bit about from Tristan Bowers, who's an Ashoka fellow. I remember going through an asset mapping, just short training. And it's like, again, it's like positive peace or positive deviance instead of looking at the challenges, which are everywhere. It's not being mm-hmm. naive. It's looking at like, what are some strengths? For people. So one of the things, we both are part of Nick Martin's the Career Coach Network. I'll add the link. So and we do a lot of work with mid-career professionals all over the world. Yeah. And one of the things, and Catalina, my wife, we work together, and there is almost everyone I know in the world has imposter syndrome, mm-hmm. and to different degrees. Mm-hmm. I have a friend who has 2 PhDs who still has imposter syndrome. So it's like mm-hmm. you can have all, but obviously I think we work with people probably work from people from 30 countries. And often we've noticed that women, mid-career professionals from the global South often struggle even more. It's true in the US, but even more in the global mm-hmm. South, this like imposter syndrome. And there's like ways that we tried to reframe and work, but what are your thoughts around whether it's specific to gender identity or just anything, but like, how do you mm-hmm. or how do you recommend others deal with imposter syndrome? And, mm-hmm. just, and any research around it, like you just say, hey, there's the imposter syndrome and do it anyway. Like, cause mm-hmm. I suffer from it some, but if you really suffer from imposter syndrome, no matter what the facts say, it's really hard mm-hmm. to not have that be present.
Yeah. So the first thing, I just had this come up with a client the other week, and usually, and she's actually a woman as well. But the first thing is I don't think imposter syndrome is a bad thing. I think it's showing that you have self-awareness. And so people who are experiencing imposter syndrome are usually people who are going to be more self-aware, just conscious of what they're doing and just conscious of their abilities. And I think that's a positive thing. And then if you take it a step further, people, like examples I like to use are Michelle Obama has experienced imposter syndrome. Maya Angelou has experienced imposter syndrome. So, the higher, and those are both women of color and very high excelling women, gotten their, have both accomplished a lot. And so if you can see women that are at that level, and I know Michelle Obama talks about it in her book as well, showing up to meetings, being the only Black woman at that meeting with a table of white men, and her feeling like, I don't belong here. They're not going to listen to my ideas. And that's, her imposter syndrome really kicking up. And so just taking a step back and saying, okay, imposter syndrome means that I'm somebody that's striving to be better, striving to take myself to the next level. And that's a positive thing. And where you can help yourself de-escalate how it's affecting you is saying, okay, labeling it. This is imposter syndrome, remembering people at very high level, all levels have experienced this. And then, women especially, but then if you're taking it a step further, women of color, because they're dealing with the double bias of race and gender. And knowing that it's not all on you, it's also a systemic thing. So especially I would think coming from the global South, because I have friends that have come from the global south relocated to DC, and I've worked with them, talked with them, and I know, something like the language can feel like a barrier, feeling like you have a very strong accent, or you haven't fully you're not fully fluent in English, and that can start to feel like, oh, I don't know enough. And that's can send you into that spiral of, I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough at this. There are way more people that are more qualified. And so recognizing there's a systemic barrier of race and gender going on for women coming from the global South. And then coming back to your strengths. So if you can, this is where positive self-talk can really come into play. And athletes use this a lot. I use this a lot too in the past. So having affirmations. So when you have something that you're saying that's positive and making you feel energized, making you feel centered, you're replacing the negative thoughts. And it doesn't have to be, it has to be something that you actually believe. It can't be something really fluffy and, you're kidding yourself. And when you say it, you're like, I don't really believe that. It has to be something that you feel good, that makes you feel confident. So having a phrase that you can insert when those negative thoughts are coming up, because imposter syndrome is really the negative thoughts coming up. I'm not good enough. I don't know this. I don't, and it, you never know how it's triggered. But if you have a plan of action of, these are my 3 affirmations that I'm going to say to get myself back on track, remind myself I'm confident, I'm smart, I've trained in this. For you have your PhD, you've built companies, and what can help you remind yourself I'm enough, and I'm capable, and I'm qualified to be doing this.
Okay, great. So 3 questions to start finishing up. I mean, I don't want to take too much of your time. So one question. Okay. I was at a great conference last week, 2 weeks ago, by a friend of mine on neuroscience and peace building. So they, mostly people from Colombia, from all over the world. And I'm not an expert in neuroscience, but I like to learn. But for people who are really intrigued by what you're talking about, and if they, one will talk about how people could work with you, but if somebody might want to really dive into this, what are your recommendations, both around formal training, and then also like, where do you go? Like, do you have a favorite podcast, a newsletter, a conference? Like, where do you go to just kind of stay up to date and be excited about what is happening in the field?
Yeah. For me, I do generally like to listen to a lot. The first thing, and I want to come back to that, what you mentioned with the stories. So what you're doing is great on this podcast, having people come on and share their stories. And a lot of what positive psychology will say too is hearing positive stories, seeing examples of seeing people doing things and doing things well can motivate and inspire you to do the same thing. And it motivate and inspire you to take positive action. So I would say, wherever you're getting inspired and energized, whether it's this podcast, other podcasts, that's really important, especially if it's hearing from people that are maybe 1 step ahead of where you are, or 2 steps. And they're sharing their story, because a lot of times their story, you're like, oh, I could actually do that. Or, really just involve them taking a risk, and I'm capable of taking risks. And so I would say for that, and they're definitely for training specifically, if you're interested in pursuing something like this, I highly recommend getting formal training. I think I've seen, you wouldn't want to go to a therapist that didn't have a master's degree in therapy. And I think it's the same in this field. I think sometimes there are people in this field that are coming in without really any background, without formal training. And that can do more harm than good. And so if you're somebody that's really passionate, interested, start by looking at what certifications can you do. Maybe there's an industry you're interested in, but definitely looking at how, like for me, when I knew, okay, I want to continue doing this, but I know I'm going to need a master's. In not all fields, not all industries, you need a master's, but teaching certain things, doctor, you need to have formal training and that. And so looking at where you can get certified, and just start small. Maybe if you're not sure, you want to go full in, taking a course, doing a certification, and testing out whether you're getting excited about it or not. Because I've had friends too that were interested in wanting to go back to be a therapist, and then they took the prereq classes and they realized this isn't what I want. And so it's better to do that than to jump into a full program because of the finances, the financial burden that will put on you. And then as far as working with me, if if you're interested, I mostly right now I'm partnering with company. I do work with people one-on-one that come to me one-on-one for support. But if your company or organization's looking for somebody to come in and work with their leaders, work with their teams in the realm of mental performance leadership, that's generally where, because I've had a lot of international experience and I focus more in the environmental impact field, those are kind of the industry niches that I like to focus on. Again, like you're doing, helping people that are trying to do good in the world. And I think everyone needs help, but I specifically like helping people in this field because their actions are directly going out and solving an environmental problem, or they're going and helping marginalized community. And so I feel for me it's more aligned with my own values and purpose to see that there's some, that's how I'm helping. I'm playing my part by doing this.
Great. So I just want to make a pitch. So I think one of the most interesting podcasts I listen to a lot is, I think it's called Founders Farm, but Vladimir was on our podcast probably 2 seasons ago. She's Slovak, but has a fintech startup in Pakistan, but co-hosts a podcast with a Greek colleague of hers, and they talk to founders in a way I've never seen anyone do consistently, and it's mind blowing. So some it's about resiliency, but also failure and burnout, and people will share.
Yeah,
it's not burnout, like porn, but it's like really in a way just saying like I prioritized this and it destroyed that. So it's really, and you can also listen to her episode. So the last 2 questions, any show or movie or any particular podcast that just occupies your brain in a good way? It doesn't have to have anything to do with work that you might suggest people take a look at.
Yeah, I'm like blanking on the name of the movie that I just watched. It was about the woman that swam from Cuba to
with
Keys.
Diane Naya.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going blank too on it.
I can't remember the name. And I just watched it 2 weeks ago, so it's kind of sad. But I really liked that movie. And for me, just being an athlete, but also in the work I do, what I got from that movie, it's very inspiring, obviously, seeing a woman at her age and being later in her life, going back and taking on a huge physical challenge like that. It's physically challenging, mentally, but no one had ever done it. There's all these environmental barriers. But for me, especially with my background, I could see where she really excelled and like how she was able to accomplish that. And a lot of it was mental. And so she did have the training as a swimmer. She was trained, she had done long swims before, but I've actually done, because of my free diving, and that's a whole nother topic, but because I had trained and competed in that sport, and I'd also done a couple of long swims, I know how challenging that is mentally and my swims are nowhere near as long as hers. But having experience pushing myself in the ocean like that, there are a lot of variables going on. And for her, she breaks down what she did to overcome those mentally. So she would rehearse things in her head while she was swimming so that she didn't have intrusive thoughts. And she was always advocating for herself, constantly like when she was out of I know I can do this. I can do this. There's a lot of positive self-talk. And I think especially for founders, because you have what feels like an uphill battle, watching something like that can be really inspiring, because she accomplished something that was impossible, and she knew that she could do it. And she had this feeling that I can do this. As many times people told her she couldn't, she went ahead and did it. And so I think if you're looking for an inspiring movie, that would be a good one, although neither of us know what the name is, but it's on Netflix.
I think it's Nayad, or maybe it's her last name, but it is a very good movie.
Yeah.
And there's also the one about the Syrian refugees, also on Netflix, about swimmers.
I haven't watched that one yet.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then the last question is, sorry, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, I can't remember her last name right now too, but I think it might be Tara Smart or Tara. If you Google Tara, neuroscientist, Dr. Tara, she's also great if you're somebody that's more interested in the hard science, but she will break down mindfulness tools or tools that you can use. So if you're somebody that is wanting to learn a little bit more, then it's a lot more, really. It's not at the basic level, but if you're interested in neuroscience, but how that's the neuroscience is directly affecting your behavior, how it can help with your well-being, she does a good job of intersecting those two. And I can email you the name
is it
after.
Tara Brock, or it's another Tara? I don't
I
know.
can't remember her last name right
And
now
then
either.
the last question: what's the best channel to stay engaged if people want to just kind of see what you're sharing and doing?
Definitely LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where I will share things. If you want to follow or connect directly, I have a website as well. If you're interested in learning more, if you're like, oh, maybe my organization could benefit from this, there's a link on my website where you can reach out with a direct message. But just to stay in touch, LinkedIn's great. I like LinkedIn a lot because, when I meet people like you, we can stay connected. I can see what you're up to. If I do trainings and things here around in DC. So if you're in the DMV, we definitely have more in-person things coming up, but LinkedIn would probably be the best.
Okay. Thank you so much for taking time out of your
Thank
busy
you.
schedule to share your wisdom. And just to wrap up again, please follow Rachel on LinkedIn. Check out her website.
Yeah.
Podcast will be live on tomorrow. If you're listening in the future, already is live. And please check out the 150 other episodes. And thank you so much again. And
thank you, Craig. I appreciate it.